Welcome to Destination Change, a podcast where we talk recovery, treatment, and more. I'm your host, Angie Fiedler-Sutton, with the National Behavioral Health Association Providers, and I use she, her pronouns. Our guest today is Dr. B.J. Davis. B.J. Davis, he, him, is the Executive Director of Sacramento Recovery House Residential Treatment Programs and the owner of Davis Consulting. Additionally, Dr. Davis is an adjunct professor in the Forensic and Clinical Psychology doctoral program at Alliant International University, is a consultant to the Sacramento AIDS Housing Alliance, and is the past vice chair of the CADAC Counselor Certification Board. Dr. Davis is the author of the 2009 DVD, What is Recovery? A Quality of Life Perspective, and is considered an excellent motivational speaker and is often sought out lecturer, presenter, and keynote speaker regarding addiction treatment, criminal justice reform, and addressing issues related to diversity. Dr. Davis has significantly experienced testifying as an expert witness on substance abuse in criminal cases and is a strong advocate for challenging some of the long-held myths about what works in substance abuse and offender reentry programs. Dr. Davis has been committed to teaching students and clinical staff both the science and art of counseling for over 20 years. Recently, Dr. Davis has facilitated several workshops related to the psychology of the Black Lives Matter movement and its impact on providing recovery-related services for African American clients. Welcome to Destination Change, Dr. Davis.
Thank you. Appreciate the invitation.
Now, my first question is always pretty much the same for everybody because I know every story is different. You kind of talk about this in your TED Talk, which we'll talk a little bit later, but how did you get into the recovery space? Kind of your basic, why that versus all the other job options that are out there?
Yeah. Well, like a lot of people that are substance abuse treatment providers or in the field, started from their own recovery story. For me, I used substances, recreationally for years, but at some point in my use, using cocaine, it got bad. I went from snorting cocaine kind of recreationally to eventually smoking cocaine, and as a result of that and behaviors related to that, I ended up going to prison twice. And the second time in prison, I had a kind of a transformation experience. I actually talked about it at length in a TED Talk that I was invited to do in 2014. But anyway, as a result of kind of the awareness and changes, in my thinking as a result of my second stint at prison, I decided that I wasn't going to go back to prison again. And when I got out, and while I was there, I was actually on a yard where they had treatment. And so I was thinking when I got out, I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I knew I didn't want to go back to prison again. And I knew I wasn't going to, the only way to do that was not to use. And so I ended up going back to school, which I think really was probably one of the biggest reasons that I got clean and stayed clean. It was, school was pretty transformational for me because I had some really very inspirational professors who actually communicated a belief in me, and so I landed in the chemical dependency treatment program. I saw some counselors. I thought, well, my background and felonies are going to keep me from being able to do a lot of things. It wasn't quite as progressive back in 1998 as it is now, and so. But one of the things that I may be able to do is do substance abuse counseling. I had counselors in prison that were doing it, some better than others, but I kind of got the gist of it. And so before I got out of prison, I did some research on chemical dependency programs, certification programs, and there was one from Sacramento, and there was one, a very well spoke of one here at American River College. And so when I got out of prison, I just went right into school, went into the chemical dependency certification program, really met some inspiring professors, and that was the beginning of the new journey for me. I quickly became really very inspired by the program. Actually, the more I learned about substance abuse in the certification program, the more I became more aware of what motivated me to use in my own process and what was going on with me, which really strengthened my own recovery. It made sense to me And since I wasn't using cocaine anymore, I hadn't burned out all my brain cells. So I was actually uh, I was a pretty quick learner. So I quickly became really invested and committed into substance abuse treatment. And part of it was because when I got out of prison, I actually continued my own substance abuse treatment voluntarily when I got out because I had decided that I wanted to stop, that I didn't want to go back to prison. And again, that was early in my recovery. And the thing about me is I'm a little bit cynical about this, so you'll understand this, Angie, because and sometimes I believe that I got better in spite of my treatment instead of as a result of it. I mean, I was in counseling. A lot of what they were telling me didn't make sense. I didn't agree with a lot of it, but some of it did. But really what made sense was learning about the neurobiology of substance abuse and the different strategies that can be used to help individuals become more aware of what motivated their behavior and to develop skills necessary to manage their urges and cravings and thinking patterns, as well as to help them create reasons, find what I call compelling whys to not use and to be able to practice those things. So I started formulating my own kind of strategy for my own recovery as well as for helping others. And people told me I was good at it, and I enjoyed it. I found it very fulfilling, and so I just kind of enmeshed myself in it. And I've been doing it now over 25 years. So and I've been clean over 25 years. So I actually never used again. So it worked. Becoming a substance abuse expert and provider actually helped support my own recovery, as well as gave me the opportunity to pay my own recovery forward by helping others. So I've been doing that now for over 25 years. And
well, congratulations on the 25 years clean. I know that can be rough. What has changed over the past 25 years for you? I mean, obviously things in the world are vastly different from 25 years ago. So what has changed in terms of how you approach the business and how you approach recovery?
Well, I think that probably, a couple of the biggest changes has been the introduction of more science to substance abuse treatment. When I started 25 years ago, substance abuse was very much, it seems like, informed, if not monopolized. But a big part of substance abuse and substance abuse treatment was kind of this 12-step philosophy, and going to meetings and doing the steps and getting a sponsor and things that I don't think that are necessarily bad, but that was really kind of fundamental to all treatment, and the notion, that you had to turn your life and will over to a higher God or a higher power. And that actually never resonated with me. So, but it was really, really prolific in substance abuse treatment back then. And when I first, and there seemed to be a resistance to looking at substance abuse differently, and kind of rejecting some of the old fundamental approaches to that. And so I had quite a few challenges in that area, even some quite a few debates around that. But back when I started, there wasn't even such a thing as evidence-based practices and things like that. So that has changed pretty significantly, especially recently, and which I appreciate. And as a professor, that is, I try to do my part in that area. I'm very big on education and training. I even wrote my own kind of method that I'm working on getting published, and I did a workshop on it, and there's some stuff coming out. And I'm not going to campaign, or solicit that right now, but I do have over the years got a notion of kind of how we can do this work and be more effective. I think that and now there are competing self-helps that I think have made treatment much better. I mean, so now, there's things like LifeRing and Smart Recovery and things like that people can go to that, have a different tone. They're not as religious based, and they're a little bit more, I think, social and, interactive. And so I think that's changed quite a bit. And then MAT services, the newest thing is really adding medically assisted treatment to, the menu of services that people can get. Back when I started, the only, medically assisted treatment was methadone, which is an effective, actually, harm reduction treatment. I very much support it and prescribe it, but there wasn't too much else. And so, but now we have, recently, because of, especially with the opiate, as the opiate crisis got to be more prevalent, and just between you and Angie, when substance abuse was really seen as like, a poor person's problem or lower SES or, marginalized populations, there wasn't really that much of an emphasis on it, at least politically. And, there was a lot of money being thrown at it. But then, as the opiate epidemic started to grow and more mainstream people started being negatively affected by it, and, substance abuse is a equal opportunity disorder, they started to look at it a little bit more differently, and there was more research that being done. And so now, not along with methadone, we have buprenorphine and Suboxone and naltrexone, better known as Vivitrol, are now, being added to a lot of the what I call, counseling programs, talk therapy programs, your typical, group outpatient residential programs. And it's really it's increasing outcomes because it's making it a lot easier, or it's not easy at all, early recovery, but it's making early recovery, which I think is the most critical part of recovery, it's making it more tolerable for individuals that are, trying to quit using opiates or alcohol or even other substances. And it's much more acceptable. When I was starting, I remember when I first got started, I was asked to come back to Sacramento and work in an agency. It was pretty large, outpatient agency. It was pretty large. And I was going to be the clinical director, assistant clinical director, but I got promoted to clinical director quite quickly afterwards. And they had a co-occurring grant, and they wanted me to help implement it. This is after I got my doctorate, because after I got clean, I went to school and quickly advanced as far as degrees go. I got out of prison, went to junior college, got 2 AAs, certified in chemical dependency, AA degree. Professor there said, you have a voice, you should probably do more than this, but you're going to need some credentials because you have a few felonies. So I applied and finished my BA degree that I had started in the 70s, and then went to grad school and got a master's of science, a 60-unit master's of science in counseling in just 3 semesters. And so I think I still had kind of an addictive personality, but I switched from cocaine to education. And then I got a fellowship that said, we'll pay, for part of your doctoral degree if you want to pursue that. So I ended up going to a university, and over the next 4 years got a doctorate. So I now have 2 masters, one in psychology and one in counseling science, and then a doctorate in clinical psychology. So they had brought me in to kind of oversee that part of the program there at the end of the place. And again, you got to remember, I was one that, I'm not a proponent of the disease concept. I think substance use is motivated behavior, like Dr. Mark Lewis and Dr. Gene Heyman. So, but I remember the director called me in and said, "Hey, what do you think about people on methadone in our groups?" And I was like, "I think that's great." And she was like, "What do you mean?" I go, they're getting help. That's what we do. So, she goes, what do you want to do with them? I go help them. And she said, yeah, but what if they start not? And I said, then we talk to them, talk to the person over at the clinic and see if we can split the dose or reduce it, when they come in. I mean, sure, we don't want them not in a group, but, methadone, if they want to stay on methadone, but they don't want to smoke crack anymore, or they want to use methadone, but they don't want to use methamphetamine anymore, or if they don't, if they want to reduce their drinking, well, I'm here to help them. That's what we do. We help people with substance abuse issues. So I'm not sure what you want me to do with them, but that's what I plan on doing with them. And she goes, well, I think that, she was old school. A drug is a drug is a drug is a drug, right? So methadone is a drug. So, I think we should, terminate them from treatment until they get off methadone. I said, well, first of all, we're not MDs, so that would be unethical for us to make that kind of medical decision. And number two, that goes against the oath we take. Why would we kick somebody out of treatment that's on methadone maintenance and trying to work on other things that's acceptable until they don't need our services? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. I go, and in fact, I drew a line in the sand. I said, hey, look, if you start kicking people out of treatment, so let me know and I'll resign and I need to go someplace else. I said, I absolutely believe in harm reduction. And so, if they're having problems staying awake in group or with their dose amounts, we can work on that. That's what we do. But as far as kicking them out of treatment, I'm not going to do that. So she decided she wanted me to stay, so they changed the policy.
Good. That's I'm a big proponent of that myself. So let's talk a little bit more about diversity and your work with the Black Lives Matter movement and providing services for African American clients. You yourself are a person of color, so I'm assuming that was a big chunk of why you wanted to help, but kind of talk a little bit more about what got you involved in that and how that differs from your other work.
Well, when the thing with George Floyd happened and it was, and Andrew, just between me and you, things like that have been happening in the Black community. So that wasn't, surprising to a lot of African Americans, especially people that come from rural area. I mean, city areas and things like that, where you see a lot of high profile police, and it's really not unusual for in the South because, there's kind of a different attitude there. But, this was, I believe, in Chicago. But anyway, the thing about it, though, is that because it was so high profile, and then you had the Black Lives Matter that started after that, and then there was this big, contention, and then a lot of things came to surface. That boiled up a lot of, I think, covert racism and discrimination. A lot of people felt, it was just a protest. I mean, and there's been a lot of different protests, but because it was, predominantly Black protests, you got a lot of resistance. Now you got social media and people making comments, and so it affected in the Black community, especially when they started to see the kind of vitriolic and even sometimes violent responses in rhetoric and in behavior. Black the Black population in general already has a kind of evolved, learned, adaptive distrust for majority culture systems and images. And so, Black people drop out of treatment. The only population, the last time I checked, that drops out of substance abuse and mental health treatment at a higher rate than African Americans is American Indians. And a lot of times that's just because they don't even participate in mainstream, what we consider majority mainstream treatment. They try to have that specialized, but African Americans dropped out at a really high rate, and that was before Black Lives Matter, and it was because they just don't feel respected or appreciated, or there's empathy, understood. A lot of times, the thing that contributes to people using in general is just stress, is being overwhelmed. Their coping mechanisms, healthy coping mechanisms, are not adequate or not developed enough. And so they end up using substances as a way to problem solve or manage those negative feelings in negative situations. And it's very effective. I mean, if you're feeling bad, it can make you feel better. And anything that can make you feel better you can become dependent on it. And so that was already the case. So so the Black population already had a problem with kind of mainstream, provider systems of substance abuse treatment provided, even mental health provision. And then with Black Lives Matter, when that happened, it made it worse. And then what happened was that because it became so prevalent, so out there, instead of being very, in the background, kind of covered, people had to start dealing with it. And then, the majority of providers in the area where I work are white. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but I mean, they were white, and they became much more aware of the disparities in their staff versus their clients, and they started becoming more aware of their retention and attrition rates. And then so they wanted to start having conversations about it, and they didn't know how, because anytime that you started talking to somebody about privilege, in many cases, white people get defensive, right? They're like, I didn't have slaves, and I didn't do that. And I don't agree with that. And, I don't know why I should be held responsible for that. And it's really not that, but so other providers reached out to me, because by this time I was an executive, and I had, I've done state presentations on cultural sensitivity and things like that, and I'm pretty good at doing it in a way that doesn't make majority culture individuals overly defensive, right? I'm able to explain it in ways that makes it, I qualify it to begin with and say it's an uncomfortable conversation, but I do it in ways where, they don't feel attacked and things like that. And so I was recruited to help providers, executives, talk to their staff about providing services and how to deal with Black clients and deal with retention, and even talk to each other, because you had staff fighting. You had, white staff getting defensive and Black staff minimizing, and you kind of talk about George Floyd and saying this has happened, and they go, and so you have those kind of problems, and then it spills out into your provider. And actually here where I actually had people from the county reach out to me and say, look, could you, we want to have this conversation in our department. We're not sure how to have it. We want to do it right. Would you be willing to come and have it? And then I've done some even interdepartmental, almost like in-service conversations about it. But, I think that, the biggest part is to not minimize it. I think that when, if a Black person, discrimination is stressful, oppression is stressful. And so those things are legitimate contributors to why people use it, motivate people use, right? I mean, stressors come in all kinds of places, right? I mean, it's not just not being able to pay the bills, or you having a divorce, or your children are, having a difficult time, or, you're unemployed, or just, or the weather's bad. I mean, there's a lot of life stressors, period, right? And all of those contribute to making using drinking and drugging attractive, because they are effective coping tools. I know people who say they aren't, they're being naive. They are quite effective. People don't use them because they don't work. People use them because they do work. Now they come with consequences, and at some point the cost outweigh the benefit, but they definitely work. So if you're dealing with a Black or brown client, and part of the conversation that comes up is, look, I feel racism is an issue, or I feel discriminated against, or there's been this oppression, or there's a system issue. For a long time, people would just dismiss that. They would dismiss it, or they would, in the old school way of doing treatment is very confrontational, right? And you got to break people out of denial, and people had to be held responsible. You got to quit making excuses. And I remember that. We used to put people in the chair in the middle of the room and talk about, how awful they were, and you own this stuff, and stuff. And when you do that with a client, it's telling you their honest feelings about what's going on. It's dismissive. And so, if you don't respect where I'm coming from, if you're not hearing me, if you deny the reality of my situation, well, then you can't help me. So, I'm going to go through the motions if I'm mandated to treatment. And then, and as soon as I can get out of here, I'm going to. And, and probably, since I don't trust you anyway, I'm not really going to pay much attention to what you're saying or doing, right? I'm not going to. So maybe even information would be constructive, but if it's going in one ear and out the other ear, then I'm just passing time, kind of like what happens when you go to prison, right? I mean, when you go to prison, all you're doing is passing time. You're not learning anything, right? There's very little education that's happening in prison, which is why people get out of prison and go back to doing the same thing before they went to prison, because they didn't, you just incubated whatever was the issue before they went in. And so the same thing happens in treatment. So, and that's why I really got involved in that. And I think I've been able to do some good work and help in that. So, I mean, at least here in this county, people seem to be really within the community seem to be really concerned about cultural sensitivity and cultural humility, and it's not the end all be all. I mean, I don't make it more than it is. I try not to do that, but it does seem like that the county has been invested in trying to make substance abuse treatment more readily available and also more welcoming to diverse populations. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, I mean, speaking of diverse populations, we have a wide range of people who are listeners, everyone from counselor to CEOs, and of course, all colors and genders and whatnot. So I always try and go back to resources. What kind of resources or advice you would use on a regular basis that they can maybe go out and look out for themselves if they want to learn more?
Well, SAMHSA is always a really good resource. I think that SAMHSA does a pretty good job of their tip books are really pretty good, and they update them quite a bit. And then the CDC is really good, especially as it relates to things like method, the medical side of do things. That you can go there and get information about new interventions and stuff. I actually have, and this isn't a new resource, but I'm a professor, and so I do assign reading, and I do teach. Again, I teach from a perspective, Angie, that's quite different than I think than probably the majority. I think that the term disease is overly used, and I've gotten plenty of debates about that. But there's some books that I recommend that I think people can learn a lot from. My core approach is it's not 100%. I mean, I use CBT and REBT and choice theory by and motivational interviewing and other evidence-based practices here in California. You have to use either CBT or motivational interviewing or psychoed, trauma-informed, or relapse prevention. That's 5, because most of the treatment is paid for by Drug Medi-Cal. And actually, Drug Medi-Cal has said, we want you using at least one of these 5 evidence-based practices with your clients if we're going to subsidize it, because science says using these increases outcomes, which I don't have a problem with. So, they treat, self-help as self-help. So when I started, people were actually being assigned to go to 12-step and get sponsors in treatment. And if they didn't do it, they'd get kicked out. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. Now, self-help is what it should be, is self-help. And people should be, really, I don't see mandating people to a certain self-help is very effective. I think people should be able to choose the self-help that aligns with their own worldview, religious or non-religious views, and personality. So I encourage people to go to the self-helps that resonates with them the most. Self-helps do help, but there's not one size that has a monopoly on what works. But books that I read that's core for me, the core approach that I use is he's passed away now, but he was a psychologist and psychiatrist, board certified, was Dr. William Glasser. He wrote a book called Choice Theory, New Psychology of Personal Freedom. That's core to my approach. It's underneath it. It has great concepts that can be used by counselors that clients really understand. There's a thing called the five basic needs, which is what motivates behavior, which actually helps clients identify why they're using. When you tell a client they got a disease and they're powerless over it, that there's really not much room for intervention. I mean, you just have to wait for a miracle. And and my approach is to really respect the agency of individuals. I think that substance abuse is motivated behavior, just like a lot of other motivated behaviors, and that's good, because if we can help clients understand what's motivating them to use, especially in the face of increasing consequences, we can help them create strategies that they get their needs met in healthier ways, non-using ways, that then they can choose versus choosing to use whenever they have a negative situation, they have craving, urgings. Because, I always said that the disease of substance abuse is actually memory, because what's chronic about substance abuse is that you remember how good it felt when you used. But, anybody, whatever you attribute your recovery to, every single person that's recovered today chooses not to use when they feel like using. That's truly what's happening. It's not magic. It's not luck. I don't think it's a miracle. I think it's increased awareness, education, skill development, and practice. So, and choice theory gives you great tools. It talks about 5 basic needs for question, quality world. It gives clients nuts and bolts things that they can understand about their own process, their own behavior, their own substance abusing behavior. And it also gives them strategies for creating a recovery. It makes recovery understandable, identifiable. It makes it something that they can work toward. And it doesn't have to be this kind of, cloud-like, amorphous, kind of mystical thing. It can just be creating a quality of life that makes staying clean and sober worthwhile. And I've had great success with it. Clients really respond to it very well. There's another book that I read that I thought was really good. It's by Dr. Gene Heyman, research psychologist at Boston University, used to lecture at Harvard. And it's called Addiction, a Disorder of Choice. I think that's got great research in it. It makes sense if you read it. Another book I would recommend is called The Biology of Desire, Why Addiction is Not a Disease. If you're open to that, and that's by Dr. Mark Lewis. You might have heard of him, Angie, neuroscientist and professor emeritus. And then the book I use in my course is called Rethinking Substance Abuse: What the Science Shows and What We Should Do About It. And that actually is edited. It actually has chapters written by different experts, but it's edited by William Miller, and I'm sure you heard of him, prolific researcher, and Kathleen Carroll. So those are books that I would recommend for people to read. I think that, along with, the normal resources available, but, I think probably the gold standard for resources, if you just want to learn about something, Samhsa.
For those who are listening, all those books will be listed in the show notes, so you can find them should you want to be interested in them. In terms of advice, what kind of advice would you give someone who wanted to do more in terms of either the choice theory or diversity or any of the topics we've been talking about?
You mean as a provider, as a
Yeah.
counselor? I think that what I would recommend is to have an open mind. I think that, one of the things that when I came into the field 25 years ago, it was, people were very, 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 very close-minded about things. If you were suggesting things other than what was traditional, it was really rejected. And a lot of times you would get, vilified, and, people would take it personal. It's not personal. We're all trying to do the same thing, right? Which is to help individuals struggling with substance use or chemical dependency, or however you want to define it, helping them to get better, right? And so, one of the things I'm working on is a presentation called Doing What Works. And there's not a one size fits all. I mean, different things work for different people. That's why motivational interviewing says, right? It says motivational interviewing is actually not a counseling theory per se, as much as it is a style of interviewing, right? But it says, if the strategy you're using with the client is not working, don't blame the client. That's just an indication you should just. And that makes sense to me. And so I think that, I would recommend that providers get out of your comfort zone. Look, don't just research what you like, or don't just research things that agree with your opinion. Look at other ways. Look at, critique some of the work that you're looking at. Look for Google and look for peer-reviewed stuff, but Google things that may come up that you hear that are working for other individuals, or a different approach or a different strategy. I just really think that, we can be a really, really narrow, closed-minded approach to treatment. And I think part of that is because a lot of providers are recovered individuals themselves. And so their theory of recovery is their own recovery. That becomes kind of their theory of recovery, right? And really your own recovery is really really anecdotal, first of all, but there's not saying that there might not be things in there that would be helpful. But your own recovery is really what worked for you, or at least what you attribute it for you, right? And it can be a reference, I think that people who are seeking recovery tend to trust individuals who are themselves recovered. I remember, one of the first things that people, ask, in groups when I used to run, a long time ago. I don't run groups much anymore as an executive, but, I'm writing grants and doing trainings, and I'm trying to actually reach more people the way that I'm approaching. I'm building a 52-bed compound right now for detox and residential, because there's money for it now. And so I'm adding that. I'm working on that. But I remember, clients would always say, what was your drug of choice? And, counselors would get defensive if they weren't in recovery themselves. And, and I'd help them work through that. So, but, your own recovery can be a reference for, you kind of having empathy and understanding how difficult recovery can be and early recovery can be. But you really have to be more objective about it and assess the personality, presenting problem, capacity, motivation, stage change, and resources available to the client that you're talking to, and then create, an intervention or a treatment plan or a treatment strategy, again, however you want to define it, that is specific to that client and their situation within the context of their lives. And if that's different than what you normally do, if they don't respond to, like, for instance, I've seen people refer people like at self-helps, and they say, go to, me get a sponsor. A client says, I don't want to do that. That doesn't work good for me. And then they get mad at the client. Like, you're in denial. You're not going to, and versus saying, okay, well, let's try something different. Let's try, how about, you're going to need help. So how about going over to a smart green group, they're online, check out, see how that works with you. Right. But be open to different things. Also I wish we were a lot more open to harm reduction. I mean, substance abuse treatment is, again, old school traditional, abstinence only is it. And if you're not abstinent from everything, back in the old days, I remember you couldn't even gargle with Listerine because it had alcohol in it. But if you're not abstinent for, everything, it won't work. And I just keep telling people, I don't get that part, Angie, because I tell I teach at a doctoral level, and I deal with psych students that the doctoral students that are not in recovery. I don't think, I'm sure they're probably drinking and maybe even drugging, but they're they're in a doctoral program. So I talk to them about this, and I said, look, if a client comes to you and they're drinking a case of beer every Saturday, and they want help, and you can reduce that from a case to a half case or a 6-pack, that's good. That's progress, right? I mean, you want to celebrate that, right? Versus somebody saying you're still in denial. I know a lot of people. It's really funny because and I know that people who are out there are going to resonate with this. I know they are. I'm telling you right now, if they tell the truth. But I know, so I've been doing this such a long time, right? I know a lot of recovery individuals, lots. And a lot of them now are program managers, and some of them are even, running programs, because I've been around 25 years. And so, I've seen people, move up. A lot of people started as, interns, counselors. And so I know a lot of the kind of the secrets, where there's never, everybody's kind of sharing each other. And I know a number of individuals that are recovered individuals. They'll tell you they haven't used meth in 20 years. They haven't used cocaine in 20 years. They haven't used heroin in 20 years. And have, a glass of wine with dinner or a beer with a game, and again, at a game, and they are undercover because they're scared that if anybody were to find out that they were still, having to drink every now and then, they would just be thrown out of the clubs. Right? They would not be considered in recovery, and somehow, and that I shake my head at that. I mean, why do we do that? Why? They haven't used methamphetamine for 25 years, and we are going to beat them up for having a glass of wine at dinner because, recovery is only this one thing. And we just gotta, we gotta stop doing that. We gotta, we need to be, I think that Albert Ellis would say that I was using the wrong term. You can't use need or ought. But I believe that, that what really is empathetic, it's what's really adherent to our Hippocratic Oath, which is to do no harm, is to actually meet people where they are, how they are. We hear a lot of people say that that's what they do, and it's really not. They meet people where the counselor is, and if the client doesn't adhere to that, then they can get resentments themselves, and and be really confrontational, or kick them out of treatment or something. But if you meet a person where they are, how they are, then they get, science says that if they choose their own recovery goal, they're going to put more effort into it, and you're going to have better outcomes. And so let's listen to our clients. If they choose a different recovery goal than what ours is, or even sometimes what we think may be best. But if you have a relationship with the client that's respectful, and they don't feel like they're going to get beat up every time they come and talk to you and tell you the truth, then maybe they decide at some point, well, harm reduction won't work for me. I can't do moderation management. I need to just quit, right? And then once they come to that conclusion, then they'll come back to you, and you can help them work on that, right? But, I always, tell the counselors that I supervise, the clients have the right to choose the content and direction of their lives and the content and direction of their treatment, as long as they're not violating our agency rules, right? They don't get to change the rules of our program, disrespect my counselors, steal, break things like that. I mean, as long as they follow rules, but they get to decide what their recovery. And I'm fine with that. And my counselors who work for me, they understand that philosophy. It was kind of new to them when I came along, but now they're big fans of it. So, I think that's really what I would recommend for new counselors, if they really wanted to learn how to do the work and be effective and get better.
Awesome. Well, I could talk to you for hours. We barely have even touched on your resume, but unfortunately we're running close on time. So was there something that you wanted to talk about that we haven't, or something that you thought I was going to ask, but I haven't?
Yeah, my publishers are going to get mad at me for giving this away. But one of the things that I think that really makes early recovery is the most difficult part of recovery. And what makes it hard is, I believe, expectations, which is, so before individuals get really, what we call chemically dependent, there are peak experiences. I call it, there's a hedonic set point. People know what that is, but it just means what, your measure of what feels good. And so, there are things that make you feel good that we would call tens, right? Getting a good grade, get, your first kiss, good food, just things that make you feel good. And if 0 would be neutral and 10 would be like just great, feeling great, right? And so, and we got to get used to that. And at the same time, on the other side, we have negative feelings, right? Bad days, bad grades, break up with a partner, lose a job, whatever. But and those would be considered, your negative days or your negative experience, can go from 0 to what I call minus 10. So you have, and typically you kind of live between plus 10 and minus 10 in our lives. Most of the time it's in between, but there are, really peak good feelings and I guess you'd call peak negative feelings. Well, that gets changed when you start using, because the dopamine that gets released when you feel good prior to using gets highly elevated once you start using. And so I use it as an example. This is just a scale, but eating a good food, your favorite food, before you start using at some point in time. Let's just say that that's 200 units of dopamine. But when you start snorting cocaine or smoking crack or shooting heroin or things like that, that becomes, your brain starts now, instead of creating 200 units of dopamine, it is being artificially elevated or chemically elevated. It's not artificial, to 2,000 units of dopamine. It's hugely different amount of euphoria. And that's why it's so attractive. That's why people keep using it. People use because it feels good. It works. It either makes you feel, I always say using does one of three things. It either makes you feel better, it makes you feel great, it makes you feel better, or it makes you feel less bad. But it makes you feel one of those three things. But at the same time, and what we talk about in treatment all the time, Angie, is the consequences of your use, right? So now when you start using, the consequences of that use on the other side of that lever now becomes jail, running out of money, depression, loss of children, disrupted family, even health issues. But that's what, in the rooms they call hitting your bottom, right? And so now that becomes your minus 10s, right? So there's a big difference between breaking up with your girlfriend and going to prison. So now you have these plus 10s that are highly elevated, and you have these minus 10s that are incredibly low. So, and now that's where you're at. That's where you're at. That's from peak to ditch, from peak to ditch, from peak to ditch, and it depends on how, your addiction, how severe it is. Now, when we have people stop, the promise for recovery, right, regardless of the approach, is that if you stop using, these minus 10s will go away or they'll get better. And that's true. If you are not doing anything illegal, you're not going to go to prison. If you stop using and can prove that and get your children back. If you're not spending, all your last money on cocaine or heroin, you're not going to be running out of money. You're probably, if you stop using and crashing, you're probably going to increase your mood. You won't be as depressed and all. People's lives get better from if you stop using, the consequences that go along with using, although they may have some residuals, but they typically get better. That's what recovery promises. The problem, and I think this is the problem that a lot of providers and counselors have, and lay people, is they don't realize that when you get rid of the minus 10s, you also get rid of the plus 10s. You can't get rid of the bottom without getting rid of the top. So yes, you get rid of all the negative reasons that were the consequences of their use. But people weren't using for the consequences of their use. That wasn't the motivating reason for using. So you're not getting rid of anything that actually is going to, that speaks to why they were using. Now, but when you get rid of the top, you're now getting rid of the thing that was reinforcing the use, that was motivating people to use in the face of consequences. Now, here's what the reality is. So now if you stop using, your minus 10s become minus 5s. What used to be a minus 10, now in comparison to your real minus, your using minus is a minus 5, right? I mean, it's not as bad. You look at it, it's like, it's not bad. I've had worse days, right? I mean, I went to prison twice. So there's things that happen to me in my life that, that frustrate me and stuff, but it's not like walking the yard. I'm like, compared to that, I'm good, right? So, but here's the thing that makes early recovery difficult is now, though, when you go back down to 200 units of dopamine from 2,000 units of dopamine, that now is not a plus 10 anymore. So what used to be a plus 10 for you is a plus 5. So now you having to live kind of in what I call almost a dysthymic level, right? Because your euphoria, your joy, your excitement, the things that you got used to don't compare, and they are not going to compare to that. And that's when people get, the expectation of recovery is that they're going to still have the same type of peak experiences they had when they were using, and they're not. And I've had a lot of counselors. So I call that the 5s. So one of the things that I teach my clients is I go, look, early recovery is hard, really hard. And quite frankly, it sucks. People tell you to be grateful and all these wonderful things. And I'm just going to tell you, look, if you have a compelling why, you're motivated. I believe if you get clean and stay clean and work on it and work on putting your life back together, quality of life and your relationships, your life can absolutely get better. You can get your joy back and recovery can be worthwhile, but it doesn't happen by magic. But in the short term, you really have to understand that you're really going to be living between the 5s. Your bottoms aren't going to be as bad, but your tops are not going to be as peak. And if your expectations are not adjusted to that, you're going to have resentments. And then what we need to do is start working on those 5s and building them back up again in a more healthier way. But what's really important in early recovery is learning to live between the 5s. I've wrote that, I've taught that to the clients, and you know what? And it's really interesting because you're going to find it anywhere unless I stole it from me. And I'm putting it in my new workbook, but I've done lots of groups, and every single group, when I teach living between the 5s, they say, that's right. That, Dr. Davis, that is exactly how it feels right now. Things are as bad as they were, but I really do miss the peak experiences, things that sex isn't as good. Things are not as fun. I don't have, there's not as much excitement. The things that I used that felt great, I go, yeah, because anything you do on methamphetamine feels great. Anything you do on cocaine feels great. Anything you do, and it generalizes. I go, and you're not naturally going to produce that kind of dopamine or serotonin or norepinephrine. You're just not going to do it. I go, but your life can be, so you stop thinking of building your life this way, which is peaks and valleys, and you start building your life this way, which means with more substance, more, it's more about relationships, more about purpose, more about meaning, more about direction, more about accomplishment, right? More that when you start filling it up with those type of things, those 5s become 6s, those 6s become 7s, those 7s become 8, and you start to actually benefit from, you start to see the reinforcement now becomes what you're able to do with your life, not running away from the consequences, but being pulled forward by the reward of your recovered life. And I just think that was something when you invited me to come on here, I go, I'm going to share this I think, just the term, I think people out there will understand it. They'll resonate with it. They can reach out to me about it. But it has been, I can just tell you, one of the most effective things. I've had clients come back to me 2, 3, 4 years later, and they go, living between the fives helped me more than anything else because it helped me adjust my expectations. And you know what, Dr. D, now, my minus fives are now like minus ones and twos, and my plus fives are now 7 and 8s. And so, my recovery, but I was able to understand what I was going through. And so instead of having resentment and being angry and things, I just accepted, hey, this is how it is. And I need to do is to focus on increasing those, those fives, getting that back, getting my joy back, working on it. And so I just want to share that with you, Angie, because I think
That is a great idea. I love it. For those who want to learn more about you or get in touch with you, we'll have links to your TED Talk and your LinkedIn and the other presentation that you gave me. But how else can they find you?
Oh, I'm the executive director of Sacramento Recovery House Incorporated. So you can email me at dj@sacrecovery.org, and that's the easiest way. I will get back to you, or you can call either one of the I don't have the actually numbers. I work remotely, so they can just call Sac Recovery House Incorporated in Sacramento or Gateway House in Sacramento.
Now, before we close out, my last final question: at the end of the day, when all said and done, why do you do it? What is your goal?
I do it because I am grateful. I really do it because I am grateful for my own recovery. I got a second chance. I had some people who didn't have to, but saw something in me and communicated to me that they believed in me and supported me. And I was in a dark place, Angie. I mean, before I got clean, I think I came as close to giving up on life as you could. I mean, literally, when I was smoking crack and at the bottom, I didn't think I'd ever quit. And I figured I'd probably die someday or even maybe just give up and jump off a bridge or something. I mean, it was pretty bad. I'd sunk pretty low, lost my family, separated from my child. I'd been, I'd stolen from my mom. Just all kinds of stuff that was really incongruent, I think, with my values. And I felt pretty bad. But, I got a second chance and I took it. I worked hard, but I had people that believed in me, that communicated to me that I had value, and they could see that, and they believed in me before I believed in myself. And I believe that it's about redemption. I owed it. I mean, I'm grateful for the second chance I got, and I want to give as many individuals out there that are open to it, that are motivated to it, that same opportunity. And that's really where I come from. And, I've tried to do it on an individual and a group basis when I first started. And now I try to do it on a much broader basis. I'm trying to create a generation as much as I can of clinicians that reflect my philosophy, that come from a strength-based place, an empathetic place, from a place of, being respecting the agency in people, the value in people, and the willingness to hang in there, be patient, and provide the support that people need who have a mind to change and get better, the opportunity to do so. That's really, at the end of the day, that's what I'm trying to do, always.
That is beautiful. You've been listening to Destination Change. Our guest today was Dr. B.J. Davis. Thank you for being here. Our theme song was Sun Nation by Kitsa and used via a Creative Commons license by the Free Music Archive. Please consider rating and reviewing the podcast on Apple Podcasts so we can get more listeners. In the meantime, you can always see more about the podcast, including show notes and where else to listen, on our website, www.mbhap.org. If you have questions for the podcast, please email us at info@mbhap.org. Thanks for listening.